Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and we will discuss on startup nations, and we have our partners uh, from IIT Kharagpur. We have our very special guest and chief guest for today's sessions, Professor Saurav. Also, we have Professor Ram, and we have our world famous speakers from around the world, Madam Ali Rice, Mr. Rob Enderle, uh, Professor Fred, uh, PJ Entrepreneur, uh, Mr. David Smith, Jiri, and Dr. Srini. Uh, so we will discuss on entrepreneurships. So first, I would like to give chance our uh, Professor Ram or Professor Saurabh to discuss about your initiatives. Professor Ram.
Good evening, everyone. I'm actually speaking from the IIT Kharagpur Research Park, which is in Calcutta, and we are part of the Karmyo for the 21st century. We are working very closely with IIT Kharagpur in developing a lot of work around our mission is which is the founder's mission, Macharya Saurabh Sarkar. His mission is basically around the biophilic dimension and doing deep study in integrating biophilic with education. And in that context, in another 3 weeks, there is one of India's, perhaps one of the world's largest cultural festivals called the Durga Puja, which happens in Calcutta annually. There we are working very closely with IIT Kharagpur to set up the Museum of the Future, which is essentially an experience where we are integrating biophilic dimension with innovation and startup. So every one of these has a theme. So the theme of this whole Museum of Future is innovation and startups. And in this, we are launching what is the first National Entrepreneurship League. The idea is to create a competitive league, just like like the NFL or the baseball league, but a league of startups, where 10 regions will be allocated 10 teams. So the whole concept is to kind of integrate this, and we are looking at startups that are from seed to pre-series A. That's the range. And the idea is to create this whole experience where the journey of startups get captured digitally online, and finally it culminates after 3 months in Calcutta for an event, and then in a conference that will happen end of the year. So that's the high level 30,000 feet view of what we have set out to do. With that context, I'll hand over the floor to the founder, Macharya Saurabh Sarkar, who's also an IIT Kharagpur alumnus, and he can provide further details. And please feel free to ask any questions you might have.
Professor Saurabh.
Thank you, Dr. Rana. Namaskar, everyone. Good morning, good evening, wherever y'all are. Ram has already provided a brief background. What I would like to add is this whole concept of has been conceptualized the very definition of the words, and today on, and it will be worth, it will be very valuable in monetary terms, and it will be worth millions of dollars probably, and also probably it would create huge impact, etc. And that's the driving force behind.
I think he's got a bad connection, but I think what he wanted to say is that typically today startups all over the world, they have this they have this connection with generating billions of dollars of value. You got to be a unicorn. But his view is different. He believes that startups should be like education. It should be just like if somebody has gone through a graduate program or an undergraduate program, he gets certified with with an undergraduate degree or a master's degree. He believes that everybody should actually go through an entrepreneurial journey. Whether he succeeds or fails is immaterial. So it's almost like education. And that's the paradigm that we want to bring here. We don't want to, and that's what we are trying to do with the Museum of Future. And that's why we are connecting it with a public mass engagement event, because we believe everyone should try their hands at entrepreneurship, irrespective whether they succeed or fail. So I think that's what he wanted to share. I thought I'd share that with all of you.
Okay.
Dr. Rana, I mean, happy to answer any questions, but that's really the context. If anybody has any further questions, I can talk about.
Yeah, first I would like to give chance Professor Fred Philip as a keynote speaker for today's discussions, how you want to define startup nations and how we can contribute for this excellent initiative of IIT Kharagpur. Professor Fred.
Thank you, Sharif. Well, David Smith and I have been in this game for many decades now, particularly in turning the city of Austin, Texas into a first-generation echo of Silicon Valley, and then consulting with many other regions around the world that want to do the same. With the IC Square Institute at Texas, the World Technopolis Association out of Daejeon in South Korea, and now with Tando. I would like to use my time this morning to share a few hard-won lessons that came from those decades. And not all of them apply to every region, so I don't pretend that I'm bestowing guidelines on all of you, but please take them as you will. First of all, I want to object to the common phrase innovation ecosystem. It's horribly unscientific. It sounds good from a marketing perspective, but in nature, and I don't intend to offend anyone's religious sensibilities, but in nature, there is no guiding hand. Ecosystems evolve in Darwinian coevolution manners, but an innovation system, an entrepreneurial startup system has a purpose. Okay? Its purpose is to generate jobs and regional wealth. So I prefer to stick with innovation system, entrepreneurial system. Okay, secondly, we have always distinguished between small business people and entrepreneurs. Although small business people, someone who owns a cafe or a dry cleaning outlet, enjoys calling himself or herself an entrepreneur, we prefer to reserve the term entrepreneur for people who are starting businesses with serious growth potential. Not necessarily a unicorn, but serious growth potential. So let's distinguish between small business people and entrepreneurs. Thirdly, I don't believe it's constructive to talk about entrepreneurial systems because there have been some notable failures, particularly in Texas, when the university turned its attention to rural entrepreneurship. Because entrepreneurship, in the sense that I've defined it, can't exist without supporting infrastructure that includes large corporations that might use the startup as a supplier, without legal and accounting and business experience people who can support this, and without community support. Okay, with the World Technopolis Association, we've seen so many instances of failure where the dominant culture was that the sons should stay on the farm and not mess around with this incubator nonsense. And so unless the community buys into this, failure is pretty much assured. And it takes leadership. I cataloged the leaders like George Kosmetsky in Austin, Frederick Terman in Silicon Valley, and many others, including in India. Oh, his name was Chandra Babu. I'm sorry, I can't remember. But it takes a leader of that stature to pull the community together and make the whole system interact and the system happen. Besides startup ecosystem, there's a lot of other misleading terminology out there. A fellow from Austin, Victor Huang, likes to talk about the entrepreneurial rainforest. And that makes everything sound happy, happy, birds singing in the jungle and all this. But the fact is that in an entrepreneurial system, some eat and some get eaten. It's not always a happy situation. That drives to a main point, which is that innovation and entrepreneurial energy happens in metropolitan areas. Okay, this is because the community support system works best in a small geographic area, like a city. This is why things happen in Austin and not in Dallas, why it happens in Daejeon in Korea and not in Seoul. The bigger cities are grasping this principle now. I call it the 1 hour principle, that entrepreneurs have a lot to learn, but they're very busy starting their companies and they don't want to travel more than 1 hour to learn what they need to learn. So the big cities have decided that the way to deal with this is to set aside certain districts of the city and call it an innovation district. That way all the learning resources and community support can be concentrated in just one area of a very large city. That's another phrase that has gained a lot of currency. And here where I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, there are now 2 innovation districts. Totally ridiculous, because in the city of Albuquerque, it's possible to get anywhere in the city in much less than an hour. So innovation districts are not yet needed. All right, so with innovation and entrepreneurship blossoming almost without exception in metropolitan areas, what becomes of the phrase startup nation? Well, that was the title of a book about Israel. Okay, now keep in mind that a very few countries in this world, like Israel and Singapore, are so small that they might as well be regarded as city-states. And the 1 hour rule still applies. And they're not, the whole country is not too different from a single metro area. Now, I asked some Israeli contacts about that book, and they said, oh, it's a lot of journalistic hype. So you must take the book with a grain of salt, but there are some advantages, of course. The compulsory military service in a very high-tech military in Israel, that when people go into the military after college, they are exposed to a lot of high-tech and encouraged to commercialize it after the ones that are not very high in national security, to commercialize it afterwards. And they've done so. Okay. Singapore has other cultural advantages, a multicultural environment where, you put together an organization with very diverse viewpoints and a lot of freedom of thought, despite what you hear about autarky and the Singaporean government. So yes, there are advantages, but startup nations are very few and far between. You need to concentrate on metropolitan areas, and if the metropolitan area is too big, you need to establish innovation districts. All right, that's my 2 cents worth, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Professor David Smith, how you want to define this innovative strategy and how we can contribute for this upcoming championship? Because
I agree with a lot of what Fred said. with a couple of small exceptions. It's been my experience as I look not just within the Austin Technopolis view, but globally with some other instances as well, in that I believe we're approaching a time where the definition of geography is different. I believe that geography does not necessarily apply to a single point on a map, but where you can find the competencies and capabilities to do what you want to do. For example, when MCC and Symatech came to Austin to dramatically grow the software business and the semiconductor industry business, the region came together. There were activities happening in San Antonio and San Marcos at Texas A&M University, and others that contributed to the success there we have of not only forming those, advancing the city and the region, but also the startup community. Because if I go back and look, particularly at Symatech, quite a few of the startups that came out of Symatech operated outside of Austin, even though quite a few were in Austin. So I think it's really looking at where the competencies and capabilities come into play. Having said that, though, one of the things that Dr. Sharif, as I look at the definition of the startup nation here, is that it relies too much on technology, and too much on technology is a thing. My definition I use of technologies is one of them out of one of the dictionaries is technologies are the application of knowledge to achieve results. So going back to the startups that we saw here, it wasn't just the hard technology, it was bringing together the critical human capital. It was bringing together the critical suppliers to the industry. So for example, when Austin grew up as a startup nation in the software industry, it was bringing in sales and marketing for software that we didn't have here. It was bringing in law firms that understood the nuances of software. Same thing in the semiconductor industry. It was bringing in unique suppliers to the semiconductor industry. It was setting up programs in the community colleges and the trade schools to provide technicians. It was not just the PhD level researchers doing work and the advanced engineers. It really was taking this whole startup approach, research approach, and applying it more broadly, because it's not just, like I said, the technology that is really important there. It's also going back and having the government support, the regulatory support that is so critical there. I was involved with a paper that just got put together here in Austin about the Austin startup environment. And the point in there is that the city has helped the startup community and they've hurt the startup community here. The lack of government involvement actually is probably what caused Symatech to leave Austin and go to New York State, where there was high political involvement there. So it's really this whole concept of pulling together, as we've talked before on your programs, Dr. Sharif, the Technopolis. It's the government, it's academia of all different levels of academia. It's the big companies, it's the small companies. They all come together to create the framework, to create the ingredients that are necessary to spur the creation of companies, of services, of products, of environments that are necessary to allow the creation of companies, the creation of groups to serve the companies and enhance the companies to come together. And it's not just the one element. And that to me is really important, is I did work in a statewide startup in the state of Indiana here, which was called BioCrossroads. It really was an effort to go across the state of Indiana, connect cities that had capabilities that other cities did not have and get them to collaborate in a way that dramatically elevated the life science industry in the state of Indiana from about 20th in the nation to the top 5. And it's that type of knowledge sharing, of continuous learning, of putting together the ability to look what is unique with each one versus saying everything's proprietary to me and I'm going to hold it all safe, but collaborate. That collaboration is what, for example, here in Austin, was one of the unique elements we had, Fred, I thought, that allowed us to really grow and happen there. Because having been involved with it both at the higher level and in the trenches, the common thing is how can we help each other succeed, not how I can be the only winner and all the rest of you lose. And I think in a startup nation, that cultural element is so very, very important. And most people, when you start talking about startup nation type of things, you forget the culture. And you forget how the culture has to be spread across all those players in the startup ecosystem. And so, Dr. Shreve, that's too many words for me right now, but that's my initial thoughts.
Thank you. Dr. Srini, can you hear me? Dr. Srini? Dr. Srini, are you here with me?
Yeah. I'm sorry. I was on mute. I'm sorry for that.
Yeah. Can you open your camera? Our first questions, as you are from India, what cultural and historical factors have contributed to India becoming one of the fastest growing startup hub, despite challenges such as infrastructure gap and regulatory complexities? What's your thoughts about India?
Yeah, from the India perspective, there are many startups which are, indeed taken up by various state provinces, and also few startup associations are already in place. Even though it started off in a very rudimentary way, but the things are really picking up. And in the recent past, even from the central government, there was a lot of push in terms of startup ecosystems to be formed. And certain state provinces have also provided some aid in order to support these startups to really, come up, or rather encourage the entrepreneurs to come out with their innovative ideas. I think this is a very good step, point number one. But I think the other gentleman who was talking about, innovation, still, there's a lot of gaps which are there. But yeah, I think somewhere it has to start. And in India, of course, especially in the technology space, there are a lot of, I would say, advancements which are happening these days in the space, in the clean tech space, as well in the digital, in the manufacturing technology and enhancements. For example, the robotics is becoming much more stronger, and drones, advanced drones. So there, a lot of new startups are coming up with brilliant ideas, and cutting across with the software and with the AI ML interfaces, which are already available as the advanced tools these days. So my point is a very interesting time now to really see this as a potential space to be in. Last time when I was trying to elucidate more in this startup ecosystem development, so on and so forth, if I just try to very quickly recap, I was talking about one of the state province which was very much interested to take the initiation in this particular space, where the government is certainly trying to be the interface and encourage to set up a startup ecosystem, not just only attracting the entrepreneurs, but also providing with a complete 360 degrees support for them in terms of the learning modules or mentoring and even the financial support as well. So I think there are many more to come in, and we are already in process of getting this in place. At least I have signed the mandate with the state province to set up this startup ecosystem. So I think if some like minds can come forward, for sure, I'm very confident that we could form a very good team. Talk to the government, talk to the local, to the state province government people. Sign an MOU with them. At least we can take the initial steps to establish the ecosystem and start bringing the global leaders onto the single platform, wherein they can actually share their experiences, what they have done, during their, I would say, they could share their experiences. This would certainly help the startup, the entrepreneurs to really see this one of the potential opportunity, in fact. And I think that is something where we are trying to just create one such platform, Dr. Sharif. So maybe I think we need to a little bit sketch on these things. We have been talking on this. Of course, there would be challenges for sure. And certainly, in case if there are some policy intervention which needs to come on some specific areas, we can certainly work on those areas and focus. It need not be that we score 100 out of 100, but at least a reasonable milestone if we can achieve step by step. I'm pretty sure that this can really see a good boosting to the to the next generations to come, and there much more, the lot of advancements which are happening in this particular space. So if I try to summarize everything and see this opportunity, which is very much relevant to the topic what you're selecting, startups, innovations, technology, how all these pieces can come together, then the academia, the institutions and the investors, the mentors, the global experts, the leadership team. I think it's more like a different, um, I would say, ingredients which needs to come closer in a holistic view. And if we can form a nice, I would say, a governing team and liaison with the state province where we have an opportunity in place already. So how we can leverage on this and take the things forward. So I think so. Whenever this topic comes, I think these are the core agenda points what I have onto the table to this leadership team who are there on the on the speakers, on the fellow speakers. So we should now, I think the time has come, we should certainly sketch out something and start working in this direction. I'll pause myself here, Dr. Sharif. So
Thank
maybe
you,
if there are
Dr.
any questions I can take. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Srini. Definitely World Talent Economic Forum institutions with all of the global partners with climate leadership, CEO development programs, we can contribute for Indian economy. Mr. Rob Enderle, as India has a lot of youth populations, how do Indian large youth population and its education system influence the entrepreneurial mindset and problem-solving capacity of founders? As you are strategics, all of the big companies, you work as a consultant to develop their strategy. How we can contribute for the youth populations?
Well, to be frank, I don't know a lot about India, so clearly not an expert there. In terms of applying youth to entrepreneurship and building businesses, it should be part of every education system to engage youth in the industries that exist. And as was mentioned earlier, the idea of entrepreneurship and I'm kind of stuck on definitions of the term. And in my mind, an entrepreneur is anybody that goes out on their own and uses their own resources to develop a business, stepping away from working for a company and or existing company and forming your own. That's how I determined entrepreneurship. But be that as it may, the problem with entrepreneurship and developing businesses is the lack of intercompany cooperation for the young firms. I tend to think the model of the Japanese Keiretsu is probably the most performant in this kind of an environment where you build communities around common knowledge and capabilities, much like Silicon Valley, which is where I came up, was formed. You create a common area of knowledge where people can gravitate to, where jobs are plentiful and particularly well-defined areas. And then you can grow an ecosystem based on the synergy between the companies that are there. That seems to me to work the best. We've got plenty of examples in Japan and the US where that kind of an environment has come forward and has worked, as opposed to entrepreneurship and development for its own sake, where everybody's kind of doing their own thing and there isn't a lot of synergy and certainly not a lot of cooperation between the entities. And we do, I think, kind of roll underneath the covers the fact that so many young businesses fail. The vast majority of them fail. And so that's why it's so very important to not just promote the idea of entrepreneurship, but to provide the underlying resources so that the companies can be successful. VC models can provide a certain level of foundation for how that's provided both in funding and in education and experience, but not all VCs aren't created equally. And the better ones not only provide the funding, but provide the executive expertise to help the companies come up. That's how companies, to a large extent, like Microsoft and Apple and others came up, is they didn't come up with their own founders initially. They came up with people running the various companies that were hired from the outside that were experts in their underlying field. The other thing to do when you're building up entrepreneurship and coming up with the underlying concept is there are sets of services that every company needs, but not necessarily every company needs to have internalized. So accounting functions, what we saw fail in the .com boom and bust, the idea of fiscal responsibility and management, those skills often don't exist in a new company to any great depth unless that new company is coming up around a financial core. In other words, their business is going to be financial, and then it would be foolish for them not to have those financial resources. But same thing with payroll, compliance, the kinds of things that get young companies in a lot of trouble, cause premature failure. Those kinds of things can be outsourced or at least supplemented with expert resources that can be provided through education by the government. But again, it comes back into making sure, in other words, rather than the goal being to have as many entrepreneurs as possible, have the goal to be as many successful entrepreneurs as possible, and success be the overall measure. My view is doing everything, and I'm having this issue right now with a bunch of people with regard to AI development. This focus on doing things very rapidly and high volume should be swapped out for a focus on doing things in much smaller numbers with a very high degree of quality. So your probability of success is higher, and thus the system can sustain itself. Because what happens if you get too many failures in an entrepreneurial effort, that consumes the resources and the overall effort will therefore fail, and you don't get proofs of concept. In other words, you build an overall effort like this, if you don't have a critical mass of companies that were successful, then the justification for the funding and for maintaining the service falls by the wayside, and you need to maintain that justification and that funding if these services are going to continue. So overall, I actually think the model of the Japanese Keiretsu is probably a better model to form an organization around entrepreneurship, and then focus on areas of specialization so that you get synergy between the startups. And there was an underlying concept of using a sports metaphor to form the system. I struggle with that only because sports metaphors tend to be competitive in nature, and really what you want is a cooperative environment between these young companies, so they're helping each other up. Again, using that Keiretsu concept out of Japan, as opposed to a competitive environment. Competitive environments in startups are always problematic. People fighting for a status, fighting for recognition, fighting to make sure they get credit for the work that was done. And invariably that becomes a cancer inside the company and a really bad part of their social culture. And that's why cooperation, I think, must be heavily pushed, because we're competitive by nature. It's not really hard to get us focused on if I win, you lose, the zero sum game, which is problematic in any environment, particularly problematic in startups. You want to create an environment where everybody is lifting everybody else up wherever possible. You're going to get some competition, but excessive competition at the startup phase is a company killer. And do recognize the big problem that we have with any type of a startup economy is the fact that you've got existing companies that are well funded, that may view these startup areas as potential lucrative areas to expand their own business, and their resources vastly outstrip the resources of these small companies, and they'll either put them out of business or acquire them, and thus kill the broadening effort where the economic benefits are spread widely. Then they just go to a few small, well-funded companies that buy them up. I'm not saying that if that's your strategy, that's necessarily a bad one. But if you really were trying to spread out the economic benefit of an effort like this, it's something that probably should be avoided and have a design that works against it. So that's my comments. The one thing you mentioned with regard to youth is extremely important, particularly now, to get kids involved in business very young. With this AI wave, an awful lot of kids are going to come out of school with no careers. I mean, they'll have an idea what the career is, but the career will have gone by the wayside sometime during that 4, 6, or 8 year period of time when they were in school, and that's problematic. So getting them involved early so that they're being educated and they're able to apply the education in business helps them learn to pivot, because they're going to have to pivot during that time, and may better prepare them for the world that will receive them once they graduate. Right now, there are just way too many kids that are coming out of school that really will have no place to go, and that's going to be problematic at a large city-state scale. And that's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Ali Rice. What's your advice for women entrepreneurs, and how this global North and global South will work together for developing entrepreneurial ecosystem? Can you unmute yourself?
From my experience, I graduated, and in England, culturally, it's very different to the States. So unless you've got 3 or 4 years experience working, doing the job that you're applying for, they don't look at you. So essentially, I have various kind of interviews, but in the end, I set my own business up. And at the time, there was an enterprise allowance scheme. So essentially, you got funding for, I think it was 18 months, and you could earn anything on top of it. I also got support from the Prince's Trust, which is now the King's Trust. So essentially, I think the thing is that if you're kind of entrepreneurially driven and you're creative, and for some reason I wanted to do things my way, so I'd always been an artist and designer, and essentially I think the thing is that it was kind of applying that knowledge to actually make a difference. And one of the things that happened is I ended up working with Creative Partnerships, which was a big national campaign, because there were so many children that were becoming disengaged in education. And essentially it was because the education system hadn't changed fundamentally, and that, because of digital technology, there was so much kind of visual stimulus that they were overwhelmed. And I think the thing is that essentially, I think it's, regardless of whether I'm a woman or I think that young people should realize that there's a possibility to set something up to problem solve. So you're utilizing your particular skills, and essentially kind of that skill sets are really important. And I think that the one thing that kind of I've learned, and this generation, I've got 2 children. My eldest is in his 3rd year of film school. And interestingly, this 3rd year, he's got a module to set his own business up. So he's got his own route to kind of utilize film and kind of make money. And essentially, I think those kind of entrepreneurial skills are really important. And I think, I'm closely connected to Genius U, which is also one of the fundamentals to me, because I think in education, everyone has their genius. And if once you figure out what your genius is, that's where your strengths are. And essentially the education system, the Einstein's comment that if you judge a fish by how well it can climb a tree, it's the same way. So I think that kind of genius and, your gifts and talents are really important. And for me, that's why, when we had our children, we supported them to follow their passions. So Koti was a filmmaker since he was 3 years old, and now he's studying film, but he's kind of an all-rounder, very academic. Alaska's, she's naturally creative as well. And obviously they've got 2 parents that are artists, so essentially it's not surprising they're creative. But I think kind of being creative and visionary really helps you figure out where you can fit those kind of ideas. And I think the thing is, I worked in the States running outdoor programs and arts programs for over 10 years as well. And definitely in California, they will give you the opportunity to show what you could do if you could demonstrate you had the skills, regardless of how long you've been doing it. So I ended up working with an interior designer over there, and we worked on huge projects that were called Street of Dreams projects. So we did all kinds of murals and wall finishes, and and essentially, I think the thing is that definitely on the West Coast, they embrace creativity, and in England you really have to work hard to make, to knock those doors down. And definitely in the UK, there's local enterprise. Let me just check my notes, because there's basically 38 local enterprise support systems for for businesses to start up. And essentially there's accelerators and crowdfunders, and so essentially there's opportunities to do it. My nephew graduated from Oxford University last year. He runs his own tutoring business, and he did a general engineering degree, and he earns like between 2 and 3 grand a month just tutoring online globally as well. And he's basically set up on his own, and he uses AI to kind of have a team around him that fulfills the things that he to make things easier, so it's efficient, but it's only him. And that's really impressive, because it's less than 12 months since he graduated. So I think the thing is that I think that one of the culture things is that that as in England people see it as having a proper job or a 9 to 5, and essentially it's much better to have freedom and have more time with loved ones, and and so essentially, so I think you just need to kind of figure out that there's an alternative way to do things. And the thing is, to do that, you need to be unconventional and non-conformist, really. And culturally, definitely in the UK, there's kind of pressure to do things in a certain way.
Thank you. Mr. PZ Entrepreneurs, you have contributions around the world. You build up hundreds of companies. Can you unmute? My next question for you about diversified culture, economy. What role have Indian diversified social, linguistics, and economic background played in shaping its startup ecosystem? What's your experience? How you want to contribute for this startup championship? Can you unmute, please? PJ, can you unmute it, please? PJ, can you unmute, please?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I think Fred Phillips said something about everyone should experience entrepreneurship. Am I right, Fred? Was that you? Somebody said it. Anyway.
That was another speaker, but
okay.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I definitely agree with that because it teaches you problem solving. Another thing is, I think in the academic world, they teach you that failure is a bad thing. I think failure is on the way to success. And I tell people have no fear of failure because most of my successes came from starting out in one direction with an idea. And when it finally became a success, it wasn't anywhere close to where I started because I listened to the stakeholders and I kept adjusting until it was a huge success. And I've done that about 4 times in my life. I've had a lot of failures in between. Currently, I'm working on building a 19-room co-working, co-living space for blockchain and AI startups. And that's what I've been focusing on when I'm not traveling around the world working with other entrepreneurs.
Thank you. Jiri, what's your thought about diverse social, linguistic, and economic background.
Thank you for your word, Sharif. I'm happy to be here. I am from the Czech Republic, and first of all, I would like to introduce myself. I have a startup, MemoPoint, Future Generation Messages, and I am an investor in Prague, in the capital city. I would like to hereby invite you, everybody, to connect with me, because together we can discuss, we can make a better business, and you are invited to my country. I would like to say something about the history of this country. There were startups in the past, but they were not called startups. I will give you a very brief couple of examples. For example, maybe you know the Škoda car or Tatra car. These were companies coming from the Czech Republic. Also, the contact lenses are inventive of Otto Wichterle, who is a Czech scientist, and the founder of genetics, Gregor Johann Mendel, also from the Czech Republic, Sugar Cube, also from the Czech Republic, shape of the propeller, also from the Czech Republic, word robot, pistol, or dollar, also from the Czech Republic, and I can go on. First cure of leukemia from the Czech Republic. I don't want to bolster here. I just want to say that these startups existed in the past. They were not called startups, and I really support this idea of making this world a better place by working together, making new startups, investing, and collaborating in this sphere. And last of all, I would like to invite you to my networking event. Check the private chat for networking between investors and startups from the whole world. It will be in 2 weeks. Thank you very much, Sharif.
Thank you. Definitely, we need your support, and we're inviting all in this ecosystem. My next questions to Professor Saurabh. Can you hear me? Professor Saurabh?
Yes.
Yeah, Professor, we want to know more about the government policy in India and the regulatory reform supporting the growth of startup. How this happening? Because all of our friends from different countries around the world, so how they can contribute in between your museum, in between your ecosystem. And I'm also a big fan of your work with your plant library. If you share some of your experience about this plant library.
So the government of in the last 7, 8, 10 years has really taken up the whole concept of startup and trying to do a lot for bringing the startup culture into India and encourage it. But the real issue is, again, as I was trying to mention right in the beginning, that the concept of startup here is dominated by the concept of success rather than failure, which was mentioned just a little while back. So it's kind of treated like everyone treats it like a lottery. So the attraction, just like lotteries or gambles have an attraction, so in the same way, the attraction for startup has come from a similar kind of business as gambling and lottery. What I think this government is still missing out on, and that's the real opportunity for startups in India specifically, contrasting to other places in the world, is that because of the huge diversity, the huge young population, there is a phenomenal potential of the concept of startup transforming education itself. So just like it was being mentioned a little while back, that the education system tries to kind of push success. In the startup, you learn how to accept failure. And hence, what we are trying to now help the government understand and shift towards is really something that culture itself towards the startup movement. Now, what I would like to just fleetingly mention there is that once upon a time, what had attracted people from all over the world to come to India, and I'm talking about several hundred years back, when this was not in vogue, used. India was really a prosperous country. It was India's prosperity that had attracted people from all different nations to come here. And then, of course, at that point of time, India was not known as India. I mean, it was more Bharat and Hindustan or whatever the land out there, which included a big part of Asia as it is today. Definitely included Pakistan, Bangladesh, and all these areas. But what I'm trying to say is that there was already the culture was already that of startups, because there was no concept of a company or a job. That was just a non-existent concept, and everyone was. I mean, for a moment, distinguish between startup and small business. The startup was, or a small business or a big business was all that was there. And yet today the country is struggling to even aspire, bring startup culture into the aspiration. And I think that's where the government is probably even missing out. That's where people like us, we are trying to bring that aspect in to the government. So, and we are working very closely with the government and the government institutions, especially institutions like the IIT, where we are an integral part now, where we are trying very, very hard to take the concept of startup to the masses, because this being the most populous country in the world now, the real opportunity is to transform the culture with the concept of startup, transform education system by what was being referred to as the startup system, if not the startup ecosystem.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for your contributions. Professor Ram, my next question for you: what lessons from Indian startup success can be applied in other developing countries like Bangladesh, like Sri Lanka, and which factors are unique to Indian context? What's your advice?
So the current over the last 30 years, the startup innovation, startup and entrepreneurship, the as defined by I would say the Silicon Valley model, has been quite very vibrant in India. I think after China, India has been the most vibrant startup in the kind of model that the Valley kind of has pursued, because a lot of the capital also has come from US venture capital funds. We've had only recently in the last 10 years homegrown family offices of wealthy entrepreneurs and domestic venture capital firms that have emerged, but primarily they have invested in the thesis. So some of the good and the bad have happened. Obviously, with the profusion of capital, there have been some startups that have succeeded and exited to global companies. But I think what I would say is there have been very few that have really pioneered innovation, and really something which is which kind of takes India to the world. A lot of the playbooks have been copies of the US models in India. There was an Uber, there was an Ola, whatever. There was a Amazon, there was a Flipkart, which of course has been bought over by Walmart. So obviously, because of the strength of Indian engineering talent and entrepreneurship and the US-India connection, there were obviously a lot of companies that have come, and also the IITs, which allowed because of if you were an IIT graduate, you could get access to capital and startups. So with that, a lot of companies have grown and created financial value. But I think what we have set out to do is something different, and that is what which is also what India is trying to do, which is trying to bring something that really applies to the whole of India, not only the consuming class, not only the 30-40 million people who are like the West, but it is which is called India, but really solutions that scale to the large masses of India, including the underprivileged. So that's my 2 cents on how the startup ecosystem in India has evolved over the last 30 years.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor David Smith. my next question for you. Okay. How does the Indian approach to risk-taking innovations and fragilities compare with other global startup culture? What's your thought about India?
Dr. Sharif, my experience with India, and particularly having taken several tours through India in the past as a guest for the Time of India, as we talked about roadmaps in the future and things like that, is that the Indian culture has a different view. As some people have said, part of it was into the risk-taking approach. But one of the things I've seen, particularly with Indian startups, is that they're pretty frugal. I don't remember the Indian term, but it really is a distinctive entrepreneurial culture in my experience, particularly when you compare it to some of the Western hubs for this. So Indian entrepreneurs of mine are more conservative in risk-taking. There's still, I believe, even though it's changing, a fairly strong stigma, social stigma around failure,
Yep.
and particularly family-based financial stakes. Even with people who we hire as who live in India but work remotely with us, we see that in some of the work that is done there. Is just the risk-taking view is a little bit different. Also, we see that one of the things that causes is some of the startups I've seen in India, they spend a lot more time with risk mitigation, which I think is actually a fairly good thing that causes some of the stress, particularly the cultural stress we see here within the United States. You see that some of the, as people have said, the government policy pushes and the experience that Indians are learning from the global enterprises are really coming back to bear there. Some of the work I've seen in other parts of Asia, some of the work in North America, South America, I believe is bearing fruit back into India on that. So as a risk taking, the innovation style, I believe, is unique too, because my experience is that their, how's the right term, frugal innovation is solving problems with limited resources, and and the startups I've seen there have done an excellent job of adopting and adapting technology to meet the local conditions there. Having been on the investment panel things at the International Incubator here in Austin and judging quite a few international competitions, that's one of the characteristics I see. The other thing is you have different types of innovation. You have incremental innovation, you have distinctive innovation, you have disruptive or breakthrough innovations. And Indian startups, again, in my experience, excel at incremental innovation, innovative business models, different ways to enhance how you localize products, different delivery formats. So I think that's one the true breakthrough innovations I see less in India than I see in some other parts. Again, to me, I see there's some really core strengths there too, though. So the risk profile, I think, is very different. The innovation types are different. I think, sorry, the attitude towards failure, particularly with the Amelia type of attitude towards failure is different there. But, you know, India's startup economy, to me, and the ecosystem really thrives on being resourceful, very adaptive, they maximize the local competencies and capabilities and opportunities and do a good job of mitigating risk. And to me, this is part of the way where every area has different core competencies and capabilities that you have to collaborate across all these sectors to be particularly very successful in extremely large market systems in extremely large ecosystems, Dr. Shreve. So I think that's my answer. Dr. Shreve, you're muted.
Thank you, Mr. David. I'm just sharing the framework from our World Talent Economic Forum, what we are applying in Bangladesh. Definitely, we work with Silicon Valley, with Stanford Product Realization Labs, and we are offering scholarship for this Tando and World Talent Economic Forum's Climate Leadership Program for 100 startups for this championship. Besides that, all of the venture capital we are inviting or the investors or corporation, those who want to invest in this startup, they can come. And also we are offering the CEO development program, what we are doing with this Stanford Product Realization Lab and all of the our corporate partners. So we believe this entrepreneurial journey right now, we agree with Professor Saurabh and Professor Ram, we want to work like a catalyst. This startup ecosystem should be like catalyst. So in this catalyst ecosystem, the entrepreneur and entrepreneurs, academia, mentor and consultant from the expert industries, what we are offering right now, impact investment, corporation and government can play this role. And it can increase capacity through the entire country. It can stimulate innovative ecosystem for job growth, can strengthen the entrepreneurial ecosystem, attract global branding for the country as an emerging innovation hub, what IIT Kharagpur are trying to do, and leverage the key emerging technologies. And by this way, we can develop success metrics based on the number of lives lifted. So for that particular issues, we also offering this training and innovation programs. So first month, we can go for sprint and we can develop the strategy. And the second month, we can execute our strategy, our innovative strategy. And definitely we need good portfolio. I believe IIT Kharagpur, they have one of the best ecosystem. They have all of the best talented people. They will come and they will join in this entrepreneurial journey. And definitely culture. What Professor Ram said, this like the Silicon Valley cultures and the India culture, we can integrate and we can develop new ecosystem. And definitely infrastructures is very important. Let's say this artificial intelligence, where IBIONs, these quantum computing methods, AI innovation lab, where IBION will play major roles with us. So that is the way we can offer the framework for IIT Kharagpur. And definitely with this championship, I believe we can uplift our economy. We can uplift our South Asian relationship, and we can make a greater place. And I want to invite all of our partners, our scientists, our innovator, our impact investor, our venture capitalist to this program. Thank you all. And I want to go for the concluding remarks for today. Madam Alirais, what are your closing remarks for today?
Okay, hold on a second. So one of my favorite things actually is actually how you can rethink your own business and model to change things. And essentially it talks about how Uber is the world's largest taxi company but owns no vehicles. Airbnb is the largest accommodation provider but has no real estate. Facebook is the most popular media provider and creates no content. And essentially, I think the thing is that we need to find bridges. So we need to connect what we need with who can provide it and kind of make that kind of transaction possible. And I think nowadays it can happen working on a global basis as well. So I think the thing is we just need to think outside the box and innovate. And one of the things that would probably help is if we got our young people involved, because essentially they probably see things differently. And, for them, the work, nothing's impossible. So essentially, I think this generation's going to surprise us all. But I think it's really amazing, that big companies have had such an impact on our lives and we're so connected. And I think that's what's exciting is that, Genius U is a global entrepreneurs network. And I won Social Entrepreneur in 2013 on the back of the creative learning programs that I ran and I run. So essentially, I think that there's never been a better time to see best practice and network and kind of hone our skills so that we make a difference to people.
Thank you. PJ Entrepreneur, what's your closing remarks for today?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for inviting me. I got to experience a lot of academic people, which I usually am dealing with business people, and I like to hear these views to see what's going on. And hopefully if you have more in the future, I'd like to be able to be invited back.
Thank you. Professor Saurabh, what's your closing remarks for today? Do you want to invite all of our guests in your program?
Yeah, more than invite. I mean, we are. I want to mention that we are eagerly waiting to see all of you here with us, especially in the event. The event is launching end of this month, and of course, then it continues for 3 months. The specifically the end of this month, which is called the festival, as Ram had mentioned earlier, my colleague, he had mentioned that it's the biggest public art festival in the world, which is as much culture as it is anything else. So it's quite an extravaganza. So all of you are invited to come here and be part of this and help us to make this something of a global phenomenon as much as anything else. So really looking forward to seeing all of you here, and specifically anyone who makes that decision, do make it a point. I mean, I'm sure Dr. Rana will kind of take the pick up the thread from anyone specific who really wants to, make the journey, and then we can take it offline and discuss the logistics.
Yeah, thank you. Here I am observing the comments from Excellence ambassadors in Saudi Arabia. I think they are very much interested. I'm sorry that today we can accommodate 10 speakers, but I saw that many speakers want to join in this program. They are big fan of startup and startup ecosystem. So hopefully we can continue these next things, and definitely we will invite Excellence Mr. Gholam Moshi, and definitely we want to invite you in IIT and in our program. Thank you, Mr. Gholam Moshi, and all of our speakers. Those who cannot join today, maybe next time I will invite you all. And Professor Ram, what's your closing remarks? And definitely we meet Professor Jyotirmoy Goswami. So Professor Ram, what are your closing remarks?
So I just want to respond to one point a speaker had mentioned about this being a competitive league. Actually, we are all been entrepreneurs. I've been an entrepreneur the last 15 years. Macharya has been for 30 years. So this whole initiative was not to bring in only competition. It was actually to bring in cooperation. The entrepreneur's journey is a lonely journey. So we expect each team, the teams that are in each region, actually the entrepreneurs to collaborate with each other and share their thing. So it is actually a platform for co-optation, which involves cooperation, and of course that competing is always part of the game. But actually, it is for that lonely entrepreneur's journey, and to give him support that we are there with him and we are actually propagating his journey. All the stories of the startups will be featured, digital content will be created, and he will be really made a hero. So just I wanted to address that issue. With that, I'd like to thank you, Dr. Rana, for the opportunity.
Thank you, our audience. Thank you, Excellence Gholam Moshi. Definitely next time we will invite you We have more speakers, those who want to join, but I cannot accommodate. I'm sorry about that. But definitely, this program will be life-changing. How I see this initiative, it will be very valuable for human progressions. That is the things our World Talent Economic Forum working with the talent economy. We want to develop a ecosystem for our talent. And through wisdom, we can solve all of the complex problems and we can go for collaboration. Thank you everyone for joining today's sessions. I request all of our audience, please share our content as much as possible with the government agency, corporation, and academia. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.